I want to tell you a story.
Or where they have had capitalism and largely free trade.
A story of a world that's been around for centuries.
It is the political system which enhances the enterprise of the people.
Used in different ways and meant different things. What comes to mind when we hear capitalism? Private ownership, industries, Jeff Bezos. If we're a radical Democrat, we think of exploitation and theft. Perhaps we think of bourgeois and proletariat if we're fans of Marx. Competition, free markets, contracts, big corporation and large banks. All of these are related keywords, but none of them can capture the essence of capitalism. Why? Because capitalism isn't just a theory you can define easily. It's much more complicated than that. It evolved over centuries, deeply intertwined with social structures, cultural values, and even religious beliefs. It reflects how people work, how they live, and how they think about risk, innovation, and success. It's been molded throughout history, from the rise of medieval markets in Holland to the eventual industrial revolution that shaped the world we live in today. Before capitalism was a thing, life looked very different. In medieval Europe, a feudal society where lords owned all the land, peasants worked in exchange for protection. They didn't really get to keep much of what they produced. The lords took most of the harvest. The goods produced back then were for household consumption, where farmers grew crops and raised livestock to meet their needs. This gave rise to the term oikonomia, which means rules for managing households, and is where the word economy comes from actually. Innovation, almost none, trade was minimal, and the economy was pretty stagnant. But then something shifted. In places like Holland, things started to loosen up a bit. Lords gave up some control, and Holland, perfectly placed for trade geographically, became a hub for commerce. Markets started to pop up, and suddenly trade wasn't just happening on a tiny scale, it was growing. What happened next was key. Farmers began to specialize. Instead of growing a bit of everything, they focused on products like butter and milk. These farmers were the first entrepreneurs because they became dependent on the market. They believed they could sell what they produced for a profit and buy whatever else they needed. That trust in the market was a major step toward capitalism. The spread of capitalism throughout Europe was driven by two major factors: the success of merchants and the rise of global trade. As markets grew, merchants accumulated significant wealth and economic power by trading both locally and tapping into new markets in Africa and Asia. Seeing this success, the feudal lords who relied on land ownership for power began to participate in trade to avoid being left out. This led to the era of mercantilism, where the state controlled trade and promoted wealth accumulation through colonial expansion. This marked the shift from a feudal system to one driven by trade.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
While the developments in trade and the rise of the merchant class were significant and occurred over a half of millennia, they were not enough for capitalism as we know it today to fully emerge. Society had to change. People's attitude toward work, wealth, and success had to change. And that change came with the rise of the Protestant Ethic. Now, Protestantism emerged during the Reformation in the 16th century as a challenge to the Catholic Church's teaching and its overwhelming power. Figures like Martin Luther and John Calvin led the change. The Protestant ethic, particularly in Calvinist societies, promoted hard work and discipline as moral virtues. It encouraged people to view their work as a calling from God, which pushed individuals to strive for success and accumulate wealth, but not for personal luxury. Instead, they were expected to reinvest their wealth to grow their businesses and contribute to the community. This was a major shift from the traditional Christian view that discouraged the pursuit of wealth and viewed poverty as virtuous. Suddenly, the merchant, the entrepreneur, became the hero to society and profit-seeking virtuous. The main change that ended mercantilism was the Industrial Revolution. As manufacturing expanded and became more efficient, especially in Britain, the old mercantilist system of heavy government control, trade barriers, and colonial monopolies started holding back growth instead of supporting it. The new industrial economy needed open markets and cheaper materials, and with the end of the Napoleonic Wars, free trade became the more attractive option. At the same time, Adam Smith's works, like The Wealth of Nations, can be shown as intellectual reflection of this already developing system, rather than the system's origin. He articulated what was already happening on the ground, a shift from mercantilism and protectionism to free markets and self-regulating market economies. The century that followed, between 1815 and 1914, is mostly known for outstanding economic growth and stability, open markets, and free movement of goods, capital, and labor. Technological change dramatically reduced the cost of international economic exchange, making an open economy that much more attractive. But it also intensified inequality between the working class and the capitalist elites. This growing divide set the stage for nationalist and isolationist policies that would rise in the early 20th century. During the interwar period, the world saw a reversal of the economic progress made in the previous centuries. The aftermath of World War I, combined with the economic devastation of the Great Depression, led many countries to adopt nationalistic and isolationist policies. Trade barriers were reintroduced, and governments intervened heavily in their economies, abandoning the free market principles that had been growing since the Industrial Revolution. Tensions rose and eventually led to World War II. It looked like we were going back to the medieval ages. After World War II, the Allied nations sought to prevent the mistakes of the interwar period and rebuild a stable global economy. They created the Bretton Woods system in 1944, which aimed to prevent the economic mistakes of the past. Key institutions were created, including the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, to oversee global trade and finance, while the US dollar became the anchor of the international monetary system. The second chance given to capitalism by the Bretton Woods system revived international markets and set the stage for rapid economic growth that followed in the latter half of the 20th century. The Bretton Woods system didn't simply fix economic issues, it reinforced the principles of open markets and global cooperation. This insight explains why efforts to replace or radically change capitalism often fail. In essence, capitalism isn't just about markets, it's about mindsets, which makes it inseparable from the way modern societies function. So, if we want to understand, critique, or improve capitalism, we need to start by understanding its roots in culture, values, and human nature, not just in the mechanics of supply and demand.